I'm kind of doing a live stream. There's just kind of some comments about the caravan. Hope everybody did have a good Thanksgiving. Mine was pretty about the same weekend. A little yard work, a little laying around the house, a little eating too much, and a little a whole bunch of picking out. Hey Kevin, hey Randall, hey Paula, hey anybody else. Like, share, and comment on this, and then make some videos of your own. For those who don't know, there was an update on the illegal alien caravan. They're basically at the border now. Some of them have apparently smashed their way through the weaknesses in the wall that has been delayed by Congress over the course of not just years but decades by multiple administrations. And so some of the illegals from the caravan are here. We don't know how many of them are going to be able to stay in the countries. A lot of them were arrested. Hey Paula. But there's still an effort to push these illegals here. Now this was originally, I believe, an election stunt. I believe they were designed to get here by election day. And there were some delays. I think the Mexican people started realizing. Of course, Mexico's kind of wanted to basically corner the market on illegal aliens. They actually had built a fairly secure wall on their southern border, but this caravan was pushed through by Soros and other illegal alien activists, and they've kind of literally pushed through in a violent manner. And these illegal aliens, as we've said before, are mainly adult males. They have a few women and children that they're using as human shields to try to justify their breaking into the country. And when I thought of this, I remembered a story about Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, the founder of Islam, and how, yeah, there's other caravans. They're even more violent, because what happens is with this, when this caravan was started, it was a group of people, some of whom legitimately were being persecuted, but then a lot of other tag-alongs come through, and they've already interviewed some people that are gang members. Some of them are from terrorist-sponsoring nations. And some of them could have a communicable disease that could start the next pandemic. There's probably a number of drug smugglers that are in among them, and they're just trying to break. This is just an easier way for them to break into the country. But you remember the story about the Prophet Muhammad, about how he had executed some 700 Jews in Arabia, and I couldn't remember where it was. I thought it was in Mecca. But the story, as I've looked up on a few websites, is that the Prophet Muhammad, when he started, he had about roughly, I think, 100 followers, and there were some of them women and children. And he originally had wanted to live in the land in Mecca, and the original inhabitants of Mecca were mainly worshippers of I believe, a moon god and some other Arabic tribes, and I think there was maybe some Jews in Mecca. And they basically rejected the Prophet Muhammad. The Jews didn't like him because he claimed to be a prophet of God, and the other Arabic tribes didn't like him because of his strict laws that he was already starting to implement. So that the people of Mecca basically kicked Muhammad out of their city and basically banned him from returning. They had a strict immigration policy, so he went to the nearby city of Medina, which is another city in Saudi Arabia. And Medina was apparently a slightly different and more divided city. It was kind of a series of more like neighborhoods and fortresses and types than it was an actual united city. There were actually some Jewish tribes that had lived there, and apparently they had some tribal feuds over, blood feuds over some kind of mess that may have been going on for centuries. And so they were divided, but they actually invited the Prophet Muhammad in as sort of a peace mediator. And he did, for a time, have a peace treaty that he established with Mecca. And for a while, he was kind of there to settle disputes. But very quickly, the Prophet Muhammad began getting more converts, and his so-called religion began to take hold. And I believe there was an attempt to try to... Yeah. The Islamic faith is basically kind of a mixture of that moon god, which is why the crescent is part of their flag symbol, and then Muhammad will kind of take parts of other religions, like some of the fasts for Judaism, some of the aspects of even Christianity, and he kind of mixed it and made his own religion, which ended up is basically becoming a pedophile death cult for him and his followers. But there was a military effort to try to get rid of the Prophet Muhammad back in Medina, but it failed. And over time, eventually, Muhammad basically just took over, mainly by immigration, what they call the Hiraj, which is where you basically are immigrating until you take over a place. And that's basically what Muhammad did in the city of Medina. Is he eventually took over there using with the culture, and was able to just conquer the city of Medina by means of not as means of invading with an army that he would later on do with in Mecca, and then eventually he and his followers would do with the rest of the Arab Peninsula, and then later on the rest of the almost half of the civilized world at one point. But it started in Medina, and it started with a bunch of fake refugees. That's what Muhammad did. And we see that that's literally happening right now in Europe. Yeah, they've had that too. I've seen where there was a cloud that came up and it looked like a splitting of the sun and the moon. But yeah, it's basically Islam is basically a pedophile death cult, which means peace by submission. They conquer, rape, and murder. And but when they can't get their way by using armies, as they did in some of their crusades in Europe, they will try to infiltrate a country by using what's known as Hiraj. And it's a practice where you pretend to be an immigrant and you take over an area, but you maintain your culture and you make demands of Sharia law. And it's already seen in Europe where they already have no-go zones. They have massive increases in rapes and murders and crime, massive amounts of human trafficking, and it's in parts of America. St. Cloud, Minnesota, I think, is one of the most highest human trafficking places in the world, because right there in Minnesota, they've I think Dearborn, Michigan is now Dearbornistan, basically, and they've kind of make their own little cultural enclave there, and they have it here. They have little sections here in Little Rock where you see the little mosque, and we've had we had a lady protest. Of course, we had a terrorist attack here with the Army recruiting base a few years back, and I filmed a funeral, a kind of memorial service that we had with a group called Secure Arkansas, and some lady in a Muslim garb came out with her 2 kids and held out a sign crashing our memorial service, because she thought she had a right to just criticize us, because nothing is sacred to Muslims. Only what they believe is sacred. They literally will destroy sacred monuments and temples, and oftentimes build their mosque on top of them. Most of the mosques that are built today are actually holy sites of other religions that they tore down and replaced with their own. If you type in the lady Jihad lady crashes memorial, you'll see about a 7-minute video of this lady who's out there at the Arkansas Recruiting Center in Little Rock. Another Muslim from a terrorist sponsoring mosque in Memphis that came down, and he had plans to blow up some other synagogues and mosques, and was stopped, but he shot and killed one Private William Long and injured another private who was an action immigrant. I think it's Quentin was his name, and he has like a weird last name, but he used an SKS to shoot them, and then drove on his way and was stopped. There's of course a book on that, and I can't remember the make of the book. I think it's called Losing Our Sons. I think it's a documentary about that. But this is what we're importing into our country, and of course Washington D.C. wants this to happen. Washington D.C. along with the USSR are responsible for a lot of the destabilization of these countries. They fund USSR will fund communist groups like the Sandinistas or the FARC in Colombia, or the Shining Path in Peru, along with China and some other communist nations. They'll dump a bunch of AKs and RPGs and military consultants, and then Washington D.C. would send like the CIA, but they wouldn't send it to like real freedom fighters. Oftentimes they would send it to, I don't know. I don't know if the mosque in Jonesboro relocated. There's one in Little Rock and there's one in Jonesboro. I think there's one in Springdale too. But yeah, the Muslims. So of course we are importing Muslims. There are Muslims in the caravan that are from terror-sponsoring nations. Of course, our immigration policy is partially responsible for 9/11. Half of the 9/11 hijackers' visas had expired. They should have been deported long before that incident occurred. They should have really never been in the country in the first place. We shouldn't be importing people from terror-sponsoring nations anyway. That's something that, and of course, if we were drilling our own oil, we wouldn't be appeasing Saudi Arabia so much with that and other issues. But yeah, 9/11 was that was the fault of our immigration policy, and yet nothing was done then. The Sennar brothers and the Boston bombing, they were fake asylum seekers, like the fake asylum seekers we have now. They had actually gone back to the country. Hey Wayne, hey Justin, and they had actually gone back to the country where they were supposedly being persecuted from, and then came back later on. They were on welfare. They were doing all kinds of violations. One of the Sennar brothers had beat up his either wife or girlfriend, and they should have been deported years ago. And instead, they were allowed to do their bombing. The Fort Dix terror plot. I think 3 of them were illegal aliens. 2 of them were had been given legal status. And if not for an employee at Circuit City, they would have shot up a military base at Fort Dix.